So when I was preparing for this homily, this is the first weekend I've preached as a deacon, so, still brand new at this, so have some patience on me. But I was really struck by the psalm where it said, "If today you hear his voice, harden not your heart." Harden not your heart. And it got me thinking, am I someone who has a heart that is soft towards God, that is open, that is receptive to what he wants to say to me? Or have I allowed my heart to become hard towards God in some way? Have I built up some armor, some layers of protection around me to keep God at a distance? Now, we can harden our hearts towards God in so many different ways. Some people have their hearts hard towards God because a long time ago, or maybe recently, he didn't answer a prayer that they really were asking for, that they really wanted him to answer. And so they think to themselves, well, fine, God, if you're not going to listen to me, then I'm not going to listen to you. Maybe I'll still go to Mass, but we're not going to go much deeper than that. And they harden their heart towards him. They keep him at a distance because they don't know if he really cares for them, if he really provides for them. Some people, they have been hurt by someone who is a representative of God in their lives. Could be a priest, could be a nun, could be a Catholic teacher, it could be someone who works for the church. And because they were treated cruelly by someone who represented God to them, even subconsciously they might be thinking, well, if someone who's supposed to represent God to me acted like that, well, there's no way I'm going to trust God. No way, I got to keep myself safe. I have to protect myself from God. I don't know if I can depend on him. I don't know if he can be trusted. And then, of course, for all of us, our sin is a way that we harden our hearts towards God. Whether it be unforgiveness, whether it be impurity, whether it be greed or selfishness, whatever it is that we're tempted to, when we say yes to those things and we turn our back on God's plan and say, no, I'm going to do my own thing, actually. God, have you heard of my plan? It's actually pretty great. You should try it out, We harden our hearts to God. We turn away from his voice. Now, for me, for many years in my life, I had a heart that was hard towards God. And the thing that hardened my heart towards God was shame. It was shame. I was ashamed to be with God, and so I wanted him at a distance so that I could be safe from him. Now, this was not always the case. When I was little, I was raised in an amazing Catholic family. My parents were super solid. They took us to Mass every week. Sometimes they took us during the weekdays as well. Catechism classes. Sometimes we would pray the rosary together as a family. And my parents taught me from a very young age how to listen to God's voice in prayer and in the scriptures. And so from the age of probably about 7, I wanted to be a priest. I felt that call on my life because my heart was soft towards God. My heart was open towards him. I could hear his voice. Now, I was the oldest of 7 kids. Do I have any oldest in the building here? Anyone who's the oldest in your family? Okay, there's a couple of you. So you might get me on a different level. When I was the oldest, I felt like I had to be like a good role model for my siblings. Right? So I had to, make sure everything was perfect, and I had to make sure they all got on the van when we left. We didn't leave anyone behind, all that kind of stuff. And I wanted to have this good image in my family, especially with my parents. But the problem is that as I got into high school, I started to do things that I knew were wrong. I started to get sucked into a life of sin. All these different things that my friends were doing, I started to do along with them. And what happened was I began to live a double life. So here on one hand, I would do my church things. I would go to Mass, I would go to the sacraments, I would even go to youth group. And everyone was like, wow, Isaac, he's such a good Catholic. And then over here on the other side, with all my friends, I was getting up to all kinds of really twisted, messed up stuff. So the human mind is not meant to live in two different worlds, right? And so here I am trying to live between these two realities, and I was becoming burdened by all of this sin and all of this shame, not because of just what happens if my parents find out, but what is God going to think? What is God going to think? And I was ashamed of him. And I was so ashamed that actually I began to lie to God. The way I would do that is I would lie in confession. I would go to confession because that's what good Catholics do, right? So I would go to confession with all my siblings, but I wouldn't tell the priest all of my sins. I would hold back the couple that I was really embarrassed about. Like, you know what, God, you can have the rest of them, but these are mine. And my heart became hard towards him, keeping him at a distance. But you maybe know this. Let's say you go to confession, you've got 10 sins, okay? We're going to do some math. If you've got 10 sins, if you go to the confessional and you confess 9 of them, and you hold back one intentionally, you lie, it's not like you leave with just one sin. No, you leave with all 10. None of them get forgiven. In fact, you get an extra one because you lied in confession. And so for years, I was just building up sins on top of each other, this mountain, because I was lying to God. My heart was hard. But praise the Lord Jesus. A little chink, a little bit of grace was able to pierce through a chink in the armor that I had built up for years. And I felt convicted. I couldn't live with this guilt anymore, and I went to confession. I decided I was going to go to confession for real this time. Now, I was still a coward, so I did what maybe some of you have done. Have you ever done this? I went to a parish in the middle of nowhere, like far away. I was like, the priest isn't even going to be able to recognize my voice. He has no idea who I am. I'll never see him again. This is perfect. So I walk into that confessional, and that poor priest, I just unloaded on him. All these years of sin that I'd been hiding, all these things that I'd been lying to God about. I just laid it all down. And honestly, I don't remember what he said. I wish I did, but I don't remember. But I remember that he was loving, that he was merciful, that he was a really good example to me of the Father's love for us, that the Father was wanting me to come home, that the Father wanted my heart to become soft again like it was when I was little. And before the confession was even done, tears started to come out of my eyes. And those tears became sobs. And I began to weep in the confessional because I felt this burden of sin that I had been carrying for years lift off of me. And it was amazing. I just began to sob and sob as I experienced the mercy of Jesus. The mercy of Jesus. I stumbled out of the confessional. I probably shouldn't have been driving home at this point. You know, there's like snot and tears, and it's disgusting. And I get in my car, and I'm driving home. And this song comes on in my car, this Christian song that I hadn't heard before. And it was called You Loved Me Anyways. It was all about how our sin had put Jesus on the cross, but he loved us anyways. And the lyrics went like this. It was saying, I was the nail in your wrist. I was Judas's kiss. I was the thorn in your crown. I was the sweat in your brow, but you loved me anyways. It's like nothing in life that I've ever known. And I was crying all over again because I was like, Jesus, I'm so sorry that my sins put you on the cross, and I know what they did to you, but you loved me anyways, and I don't deserve it, and I couldn't earn it, and your mercy is a free gift, and I just received from him. And it was beautiful. And after that, I was able, because my heart had been softened by God again, I was able to once again hear his voice, and he said, Isaac, I still want you to be one of my priests. Even though I'm unworthy, he still called me. Now, he doesn't just want this kind of mercy for me, he wants it for you. If you're sitting there in this pew and you're thinking to yourself, man, my heart has become hardened towards God. I haven't noticed it, but over time it's become hard because of this or that. Today, hear the word of the Lord. The word of the Lord that was just proclaimed. If today you hear his voice, harden not your heart. Hear his word today. If you hear his voice, harden not your heart. Whatever that looks like to you, if it means going to Mass more regularly, if it means going back to confession, if it means like me being truthful in confession after a long time, don't let your heart be hard towards God. Open yourself to him. He wants you to come back to him. He wants you to come home. If today you hear his voice, harden not your heart.